Hey there. My name is Eldrick Stone, and I live alone on a small farm at the edge of Red Hollow Prairie, half a day's ride from the town of Drymere. The place isn't much, just a low wooden house with a pine-shingled roof, a barn that leans a little to the west, and a few fenced pastures where the grass turns brown too early every summer. I came here after my father died, sold the family Smitty, and decided the quiet was better than the noise of people. I wake before dawn, light the stove, feed the animals, mend fences, dig ditches, and fall asleep, listening to the wind rattle the porch boards. It's simple. It's enough. I never planned on bringing anyone back to that house. That morning I only rode into Drymere to buy 2 lean cows and the last sacks of barley seed before winter locked the roads. The drought had been cruel. Fields were cracked. Barns were emptying, and every coin sounded like bones knocking together. I tied my horse at the edge of the market square and walked through the usual smell of dust leather and horse sweat. But there were no cows for sale. Instead, in the middle of the square, someone had nailed together a rough wooden platform. On it stood a woman in chains, not iron shackles, thick rope around her wrists and a shorter length around her throat tied to a post. Her black hair was tangled as if she had run through thorn bushes. Her dress was torn at the hem, her feet bare and streaked with red dirt, but her chin was lifted high the way a wolf lifts its head when cornered. She did not look defeated. She looked ready to tear the whole world apart with her teeth. Her eyes were the color of deep amber held to firelight, and they scanned the crowd like every face was garbage. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his neck and tried to sound cheerful. Found her living alone in the Red Rock borderlands. No clan mark, no papers, no family. The shelter station tried 3 households. She ran from all 3. The last one still has bite marks on the man's hand when he tried to lock her in the shed. Laughter rippled through the square. I did not laugh. A fat man named Darwin Pike at the front whistled. "How much?" 50 silver pieces to the shelter station if anyone takes her on as labor, the auctioneer said. "She's strong, she works hard, but she's wild. No one's broken her yet." The word broken sat wrong in my stomach. Darwin Pike grinned wider. "My wife needs help in the kitchen. And if she runs again, my barn has a lock that'll hold." The orc woman turned her head and looked straight at him. The laughter died for half a second. In her eyes, there was no fear, only a flat promise. "Touch me," she said, voice rough and sharp, "and I will burn your house while you sleep." Silence. I do not know what made me step forward. Maybe it was the way she stood alone against 100 eyes and still refused to bend. Maybe it was because I have lived long enough on the border to know the difference between wild and wounded. I pushed through the crowd until I stood directly beneath the platform and looked up at her. 50 silver pieces, I said. And I will not chain her. No ropes, no locks, no bowing her head. The auctioneer blinked. "Stone, what in the hells do you plan to do with a woman like that?" I kept my eyes on her. "I plan to do nothing. I only want to give her a roof. If she wants to leave, she leaves." The orc woman stared at me for a long time. Her gaze felt like a knife sliding across my skin, searching for the lie. I did not look away. There was no lie to find. The auctioneer brought his hammer down. "Sold to Eldrick Stone." I stepped up onto the platform. When I drew my knife to cut the rope at her wrists, she did not flinch or thank me. She only leaned close enough for her words to reach my ear alone. "If you are lying, I will be gone before the first rooster crows." I sliced the rope clean and answered with the only truth I had. "If you want to leave, I will not stop you." For the first time, her amber eyes flickered just a fraction. But it was enough for me to know this was no longer about buying cows. I paid the 50 silver, led her through the parting crowd, and helped her onto the wagon seat. I left plenty of space between us. She sat straight-backed, scanning every bush, every turn in the road, memorizing every place she could jump and disappear if she needed to. The sun was already low and red by the time we left Drymere behind. The prairie stretched out empty and golden. I had come for 2 cows. Instead, I was riding home with an orc woman who had already warned me she would burn my house down if I proved false, and for reasons I still could not name that felt like the first honest thing that had happened to me in years. The ride back to Red Hollow stretched across most of the afternoon. As soon as we cleared the last house of Drymere, I pulled the wagon to the side of the road and drew my knife. Sarah tensed eyes narrowing, but she did not flinch when I cut the rope from her wrists and the shorter length from her throat. I tossed the coils into the grass and slid back to the far side of the seat, leaving a wide gap between us. She said nothing. She simply sat straighter, scanning the road ahead, the thorn bushes, every bend and dip where a person could jump and vanish. Her bare feet rested on the rough boards of the wagon, and her torn dress fluttered in the dry wind. I kept the horses at a steady walk and my mouth shut. Some silences are heavier than questions. Only when the sun had dropped low and painted the prairie red did I speak. "What should I call you?" She stayed quiet so long I thought she would not answer. Then in a voice like gravel under a boot, she said, "Sarah. Pretty name." I hated. I glanced at her. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "My mother gave it to me," she added flatly. "Then she sold me to a merchant family the day I was strong enough to carry water and firewood and take a beating without dying." The words landed between us like stones. No tears, no tremble in her voice, just the flat truth of someone who had stopped expecting kindness long ago. I did not press for more. A woman who had just stepped off an auction block did not owe me her whole story. The farm appeared under the last red light, low wooden house with pine shingles barn leaning slightly west, a few fenced pastures, and the well behind the yard. Nothing fancy. Nothing that could scare anyone. I climbed down, first opened the gate, and stepped back. Sarah ignored my offered hand and jumped to the ground as lightly as a wildcat. She stood in the middle of the yard and turned slowly, taking in everything. Windows, barn door, water trough grain, shed the open space between house and fence where a running person could not be easily caught. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yeah." "Why?" I shrugged. "Never needed anyone else here before." She gave me a look I couldn't read, as if my answer surprised her more than anything else that day. I led her inside. One main room. Stone hearth, wooden table, my bed in the far corner, and a ladder to the loft where I stored hay and old tools. I pointed up. "You sleep in the loft. There's a door with a bolt on the inside. You can lock it if you want." Sarah stopped halfway up the ladder. She stared at the small wooden door at the top as if it might bite her. "You're not afraid I'll take a knife to you in your sleep?" she asked. "Knives are in the kitchen. If you want one, you'll get it. But I figure if you really meant to kill me, you would have done it the second I cut those ropes outside town." She said nothing. I carried a basin of water up along with an old shirt of mine and a wool dress my cousin had left years ago. When I came back down, I lit the stove and started supper potato soup and smoked meat. By the time the pot bubbled, she came down the ladder. My shirt hung loose on her sleeves rolled high. Her black hair was smoother now, but her eyes still carried the same wary fire. She did not sit right away. She watched me ladle the soup into 2 bowls, set hers down first, then took the chair across from me. She studied the food like it might be poisoned. "Why?" she asked again. "You hate that question." "I hate owing people." I sat down. "I didn't buy you for work or for anything else. I paid the silver to get you off that platform. You can work if you like. You can stay silent if you like. You can leave whenever you want. I only gave you a roof." Sarah picked up the spoon slowly. By the 3rd bite, her hands had stopped shaking. But I saw the faint shine of wetness at the corners of her eyes, as if simple decency was the one thing that could still cut her. That first night, I heard the bolt on the loft door slide shut from the inside. I lay in my bed below and smiled into the dark. At least she trusted the roof enough to sleep under it, but not enough to leave the door unlocked. That was fair. Outside, the prairie wind moved through the fences. Inside, for the first time in years, I heard another person breathing somewhere in the house. It was a small sound, but it filled the whole quiet space like it belonged there. The first weeks were not easy. Sarah did not break things, did not scream, and did not run the way the town had whispered she would, but she lived like an animal that had just slipped its collar and still expected the chain to snap back at any moment. Every night I heard the bolt on the loft door slide shut from the inside. She kept a small knife hidden beneath her pillow. I saw the handle once when she thought I was asleep. She ate fast as though someone might snatch the bowl away, and every time I stepped into a room without warning, her shoulders tightened before her mind caught up and remembered it was only me. I never pushed. I simply did what I had always done. Rose before dawn, lit the stove, fed the animals, mended fences, checked the well. I left her choices open. If she wanted to work, the work was there. If she wanted silence, the silence was hers. On the third morning, I came in from the barn and found the porch, swept clean the onions I had left hanging in the kitchen, neatly tied with twine, and a torn curtain mended with stitches so small and tight, my own hands could never have matched them. On the fifth day, she walked out to the back pasture while I was doctoring a lame horse and said, without being asked, that the brown cow had a hoof infection. I did not believe her at first, but when I checked, the heat and swelling were exactly where she pointed. She mixed a poultice from hearth ash and sheep fat, smeared it on, and the cow stopped limping by the next sunrise. On the seventh day, she followed me up the hill to gather deadwood. She moved through the brush like she had been born in it, setting 3 rabbit snares with thin strips of rawhide while I was still stacking branches. By the time the sun dropped, she had already skinned and cleaned one of the rabbits and laid half the meat on my plate without a word. I looked at the seared pieces, then at her. "Thank you." Sarah shrugged, but the corner of her eye softened the smallest fraction. It was the first thing she had given me that came from her own hands. Spring arrived slowly. Grass pushed up along the fences. The southern ditch ran fuller. Sarah and I fell into a rhythm that needed no words. We repaired the barn roof, together cleared thistle from the potato rows, dug new irrigation trenches, patched the horse trough where the wood had split. She worked beside me from first light until the sky turned the color of old brass. Sometimes our shoulders brushed when we lifted the same rail. Neither of us pulled away. The days felt almost ordinary until the afternoon 3 riders appeared at the gate. I was on the ladder fixing a loose shingle when I heard the horses. Sarah stood below, holding the ladder steady. When I looked down, I recognized Hendrell Pike at the front, the same fat man who had wanted her at auction, flanked by the shelter station overseer and one of the big landowners from the river bend. Hendrell leaned on his saddle horn and smiled the kind of smile that made my jaw ache. "I told you she'd be trouble," he called up. The station received a complaint. If the girl isn't working out or if you can't keep her in line, they have the right to reassign her. Sarah set the ladder down very slowly. I climbed down and stepped in front of her. "She isn't assigned to anyone," I said. "She stays because she chooses to." The overseer cleared his throat, trying to sound official. "According to the records, she has not signed any formal free residence papers. Legally, she can still be transferred if the original holder cannot control her." Hendrell swung down from his horse and took a step closer. "See, even the law knows a wild thing needs a firm hand." Sarah moved then. She stepped out from behind me and stood at my side, shoulder to shoulder. Her voice was quiet, but every man there heard it clearly. "I am not going anywhere with you." The overseer looked at me, expecting me to correct her to make her sound obedient. I did not. "You heard her?" I said. Hendrell's face darkened. He took another step close enough that I could smell the sour ale on his breath. "You think you're doing her a favor, Stone. The kind doesn't stay tame. She'll run, or she'll bite, and when she does, you'll wish you'd locked her up like I told you." Sarah did not move. She simply looked at him with the same flat amber stare that had silenced the entire market square weeks earlier. I rested my hand on the hilt of the knife at my belt. "Get back on your horse, Hendrell." For a long second, no one breathed. Then the overseer muttered something about proper channels and tugged at Hendrell's sleeve. Hendrell spat once hard into the dirt, climbed back into the saddle, and wheeled his horse around. The 3 of them rode off in a cloud of dust. I waited until the dust settled before I let my hand drop. Beside me, Sarah stood perfectly still for another heartbeat. Then she turned and looked at me the way someone looks at a riddle they cannot solve. "You did not have to do that. I know. They will come back. I know that too." She studied my face for a long time, as if searching for the trick, the catch, the moment when I would finally demand payment for everything I had given her. She did not find it. And in that quiet space between us, I realized something dangerous. I was no longer keeping her here because I had promised a roof. I was keeping her here because I had begun to want her to belong. The thought settled in my chest like a warm stone. I did not speak it aloud. Not yet. But the wind across the prairie seemed to carry it anyway, and for the first time since she had come to the farm, Sarah did not look away. Late winter in Red Hollow bites twice, once with freezing rain that soaks through every seam, once with fever that follows. I had spent the whole day out in the northern pasture patching the fence where the spring melt had torn it open. By the time I staggered back to the house, my coat was heavy with water and my chest felt packed with wet straw. I told myself it was nothing a hot supper and a night by the fire could not fix. I was wrong. The next morning, I could not get out of bed. My skin burned, my throat was raw, and every breath scraped like broken glass. I remember Sarah's voice cutting through the haze, sharp and steady. "Lie down! Do not fight me!" She dragged the blankets higher, pressed a cold cloth to my forehead, and forced a cup of bitter herbal tea between my lips. I tried to argue, but the words came out slurred. She did not listen. For 3 days, the world narrowed to the sound of her moving around the house, the scrape of the kettle, the crackle of the stove, the soft pad of her bare feet on the wooden floor. She fed me thin soup, changed the cooling rags, and sat on the stool beside the bed through the long hours of the night. On the third night, the fever climbed higher. I drifted in and out, calling a name I had not spoken in 10 years. Lyra, the girl I once thought I would marry before she left for the southern towns and a better life. I heard myself repeating it like a broken record, ashamed even in delirium. When the worst of it broke, I woke to pale dawn light, and Sarah asleep in the chair, one hand still resting on the edge of my blanket, as if ready to catch me if I fell again. Her black hair had slipped from its tie and curled against her cheek. In sleep, her face lost every hard line the world had carved into it. She looked younger, almost fragile, and the sight twisted something deep in my chest. I lay there a long time, watching her breathe, too weak to move and too aware to look away. When her eyes finally opened, she startled, then relaxed, the moment she saw I was lucid. "You called her name?" she said quietly, no accusation in her voice, only fact. "Lyra." I swallowed, throat still raw. An old ghost. She left years ago. Sarah nodded once. She stood, poured fresh water, and held the cup to my lips without being asked. Her fingers brushed mine when I took it. Neither of us pulled away. "You do not owe me the story," she murmured. "I know, but I want you to hear it anyway." My voice cracked. I told myself after she left that this house was enough. One man, one roof, no one else to lose. Then you stepped off that platform and everything I thought was simple stopped being simple. She was quiet for so long I wondered if I had said too much. Then she set the cup down and sat on the very edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. I could feel the warmth of her leg through the blanket. "I have never been chosen," she said. "Not once. Not by my mother. Not by any house that bought me. Not by the men who looked at me like meat on the block. They all wanted to own me. You were the first person who only offered me a door I could walk through." Her hand moved slow and deliberate and rested on top of mine where it lay on the blanket. Her palm was rough from work, warm from the fire, and it did not tremble. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers through hers. The touch was simple. It was everything. "I am not trying to tame you, Sarah." I said the words finally leaving the place I had kept them locked. "I do not want to break you or keep you or claim you. I just want you here, if you choose it, even if you never choose more than that." Her amber eyes searched my face the way they had on the auction platform looking for the lie. She did not find one. Instead, she leaned forward slow enough that I could have stopped her if I wanted to. I did not. Her lips brushed mine, once feather-light tasting of the herbal tea she had been drinking all night. It was not hunger. It was recognition. A question asked without words and answered the same way. When she pulled back, her cheeks carried the faintest flush. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I answered. "But we do not have to know tonight." She stayed beside the bed until the sun was fully up. Later, when I was strong enough to sit on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, she brought me a bowl of thick stew and sat on the step below me. We ate in silence while the prairie wind moved through the new grass. That night I heard her climb the ladder to the loft. The bolt did not slide shut. The door stayed unlatched, a small gap of darkness between us and the rest of the world. I lay awake long after the fire had burned low, listening to the quiet creak of the house and the soft sound of her breathing above me. For the first time since she had come here, I understood the real danger. I was no longer keeping her safe from the world. I was falling in love with the woman the world had called untamable, and the only thing that mattered now was whether she trusted me enough to stay. Everything came to a head at the beginning of spring when the big market opened in Drymere and Hendrel Pike returned. This time he did not come alone. He brought 2 hired hands, a clerk from the shelter station carrying an official parchment stamped with the town seal and the same smug certainty that he could still take what he wanted. They arrived while I was on the barn roof, hammering a loose shingle. Sarah stood below me steadying the ladder. When the horses stopped at the gate, she set the ladder down with deliberate care, the way she did everything now, like the world might still try to snatch it away. Hendrel read from the paper in a loud official voice. "The station has reviewed the original assignment. Since no formal free residence contract was signed, the girl remains transferable labor if the current holder cannot provide adequate control." Sarah's knuckles went white around the ladder rung. I climbed down and stepped in front of her. "She is not transferable," I said. "She stays because she chooses to." The clerk lifted his chin. "Legally, she can still be reassigned if the original arrangement lacks binding documentation." Hendrel swung down from his saddle and took 1 step closer. "See stone. Even the law knows a wild thing needs a firm hand." Sarah moved then. She stepped out from behind me and stood at my side, shoulder to shoulder the same way she had stood on that auction platform weeks ago. Her voice was low, but every man heard it. "I am not going anywhere with you." The clerk looked at me, expecting me to correct her, to make her sound obedient. I did not. "You heard her," I said. Hendrel's face twisted. He took another step close enough that I could smell the sour ale on his breath. "You think you're doing her a favor? That kind doesn't stay tame. She'll run or she'll bite, and when she does, you'll wish you'd locked her up like I told you." Sarah did not flinch. She simply looked at him with the same flat amber stare that had once silenced the entire market square. I rested my hand on the hilt of the knife at my belt. "Get back on your horse, Hendrel." For a long second, no one breathed. Then the clerk muttered something about proper channels and tugged at Hendrel's sleeve. Hendrel spat once hard into the dirt, climbed back into the saddle, and wheeled his horse around. The 3 of them rode off in a cloud of dust. I waited until the dust settled before I let my hand drop. Beside me, Sarah stood perfectly still for another heartbeat. Then she turned and looked at me, the way someone looks at a riddle they cannot solve. "You did not have to do that. I know. They will come back. I know that too." She studied my face for a long time, as if searching for the trick, the catch, the moment when I would finally demand payment for everything I had given her. She did not find it. And in that quiet space between us, I realized something dangerous. I was no longer keeping her here because I had promised a roof. I was keeping her here because I had begun to want her to belong. The thought settled in my chest like a warm stone. I did not speak it aloud, not yet. But the wind across the prairie seemed to carry it anyway, and for the first time since she had come to the farm, Sarah did not look away. 2 days later, I rode into Drymere alone and stood before the shelter station clerk with a fresh sheet of parchment. I signed the document that declared Sarah free to stay free, to leave, free to choose any life she wanted. I paid the fee, took the paper, and rode home with it folded carefully inside my coat. When I reached the farm, she was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, eyes wary. I handed her the document without a word. She read it slowly, tracing every line with her fingertip as if she expected the ink to vanish. When she reached the bottom, her shoulders loosened in a way I had never seen before. "You made it official," she said. "I did. Now no one can ever claim you again. Not Hendrel. Not the station. Not even me." She folded the paper with the same care I had used and slipped it into the pocket of the wool dress she now wore every day. Then she looked up at me, amber eyes steady. "I have spent my whole life being chosen for other people," she said. "Chosen to carry water, chosen to take beatings, chosen to warm someone's bed or scrub their floors. No one ever stood in front of me and said I could walk away if I wanted." She stepped closer until there was almost no space left between us. "Today I choose to stay." The words landed soft and certain. I lifted my hand and brushed a strand of black hair from her cheek. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch eyes, closing for half a breath. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered again. The same words she had spoken beside my sickbed. "Neither do I answered. "But we have time to learn." That evening, I hung an extra coat peg beside the door. I moved my bed closer to the wall so the loft felt less like a separate world. Sarah still climbed the ladder every night, but the bolt stayed open. Some nights, I heard her come down the rungs and stand at the bottom for a long time listening to me breathe. I never spoke. I simply left the choice in her hands the way I had promised from the first day. Spring turned the prairie green. The ditches ran full. We planted barley together, repaired the barn roof side by side, and sat on the porch after supper watching the sun bleed across the grass. She still looked at strangers with the old wariness, still carried the small knife in her boot, still woke sometimes from dreams that made her sit bolt upright in the dark. But every morning she chose the same thing: the farm, the work, the quiet life with me. And every evening I chose her right back. No one ever tamed the orc girl who once stood on the auction block like she wanted to bite the whole world. She was never meant to be tamed. She only needed one man honest enough to say, "You can leave if you want. I only gave you a roof." And when he did, she chose of her own free will to stay.